Alrighty, good morning everybody. Welcome back to Math 105. Plan for today is we are going to do some more discussion of the Lewis Carroll puzzles we started talking about last time and finish Standard 8, which is going to take us to the end of our first major unit in this course, kind of the unit on mathematical logic. As far as office hours go, we've got one this afternoon from 2 to 3. And office hours tomorrow morning from 10 to 11, and tomorrow afternoon from 1:30 to 2:30. Let's see, and as far as homework goes, what did I write this? Standard 7 quiz. We've got a quiz up on Standard 8, which will be due on Friday evening. And also don't forget the Standard 7 quiz, which is due tonight. So I have a few comments I want to make before we kind of get things going for today. The first is I've had more and more students ask me if it's okay for them to skip class and just watch the video recordings. And yes, that's absolutely fine. If you feel like uncomfortable coming to class, you don't have to be in official quarantine or anything. You can just send me an email and say, Dr. Gerstle, I would prefer not to come to class. And that's totally fine. It's just a reminder. If you want to watch the video recordings of the class, if you go to the Blackboard page, there's a link over. There's one of the what do I call those? Course subsections, like where there's tabs. That's what there's like an assignment tab, retest tab. There's also a tab that just has a link that'll take you to my YouTube channel, where I've been posting all the classes that are that have each the date for each class on there. So if you'd rather if you feel more comfortable skipping class and just watching the video recording, that's absolutely fine. Other thing I want to talk about is the exam. I finished grading the exam yesterday, and so your masteries, I have not updated your mastery totals yet. Didn't get time to do that quite yet, but I'll probably do that later today or tomorrow. But you should be able to go into the exam, and there's a comment section where pretty much the only thing I wrote is just Standard 2, M. Standard 3, J. Standard 4, M. Whichever standards you did, I gave you a grade on each one of those. And there's, if you go into the individual exam, I made comments on the file that you submitted to me. You should be able to go in and look at my comments and kind of see on the exam itself, kind of like made annotations and made marks as to things I wanted to comment on. The next exam will be for standards 1 through 10, and I expect that will be, like maybe Wednesday or Friday, the week after fall break, if I had to guess. So like 2 weeks-ish from now. We're finishing up Standard 8 today, and then we'll have 2 more standards to go before the next exam. Anybody have any questions or comments about the exam, things going on in the class, or whatnot? Okay, in that case, what do you call an angle that's been in an accident? You call it a rectangle. Okay, so you may recall from class last time, we looked at an example of these Lewis Carroll puzzles, which are basically challenges where you're given a bunch of different implications written out in sentence form. And our goal was to try and connect them all together and form a single conclusion that has to hold true using all of the statements in the hypothesis that was given. And so in particular, I'm going to go to the back page of the packet from last time and spend today looking at a couple of examples. I thought it'd be good to get a couple more examples for you to see so that you feel a little bit more confident in doing these puzzles. So I'm going to look at the one at the top, which says, all mermaids are noticed at sea. Anything worth entering in the log must be worth remembering. I have never met with anything worth remembering on a voyage. And finally, if it is noticed at sea, then it is worth recording in the log. So in other words, it be a pirate fiend. So this time, we're actually, instead of being given 3 statements that make up a hypothesis, we're actually given 4 separate statements. All mermaids are noticed at sea. Anything worth entering in the log must be worth remembering. I've never met anything worth remembering. And if it is noticed at sea, then it is worth recording in the log. And our goal is to come up with a single statement that will be an inescapable conclusion that we can arrive at using these statements and perhaps their contrapositives. So if you recall, our strategy from last class was just like we did with the syllogisms in Standard 7, in which we could take our statements, write them all down in symbolic form, and then see if we can form a string of arrows that says base statement 1 leads to base statement 2, leads to base statement 3, leads to negation of base statement 4, and so on and so forth. It was kind of our strategy for going through this. So let's see if we can make our base statements first of all. So if we look at our first statement, all mermaids are noticed at sea. How could we take 2 sort of base statements out of that we could then use to rewrite statement 1 as an implication?
All mermaids are at sea and all mermaids are noticed.
Yeah, all mermaids are at sea and all mermaids are noticed. I'm not going to write it. I'm not going to use exactly those, but I do think we want one statement to be about mermaids and one statement to be about being at sea. I don't want to include necessarily the word all in either of the 2 base statements, mainly because if we were to rewrite in this first statement in the if-then form, I think it would be something like, if it is a mermaid, then it is noticed at sea. So do you have to restate your base statements?
Oh yeah. If it is a mermaid, then it is noticed. If it is a mermaid, then it is at sea.
Well, typically we don't want our base statements to be written in implication form.
Yeah. So a mermaid is noticed and a mermaid is at sea then?
Yeah, let's just say how about our first one can be it is a mermaid, and then our second one can be it is noticed at sea.
Okay.
Because then that would be first thing implies second thing would just be if it is a mermaid, then it is noticed at sea. And sometimes with things like this that are secretly implications but aren't written in the strict if-then form, sometimes it might be helpful if you're having trouble interpreting it, what are the base statements, to just go ahead and write it in the if-then form. Because then it can be maybe a little bit easier to look at and evaluate. So for our first statement, if it is a mermaid, what letter would you like to use for that one? It is a mermaid.
W.
W?
Yeah.
Okay, we have an M. Mermaid starts with an M. We're going with an upside down M. And then we need a letter for it is noticed at sea. Letter W is perfectly fine, by the way. S. S for sea? Sounds good. So it is a mermaid. It is noticed at sea. We can then rewrite our first statement as W implies S. If W is true, if it is a mermaid, then S, then it is noticed at sea, I think means the same thing as all mermaids are noticed at sea. So our second statement is anything worth entering in the log must be worth remembering. What could be our two base statements that are found in this one? Anything worth entering in the log must be worth remembering. What would be two base statements that, if we combine together with an implication, would give us this statement number 2?
It is worth entering in the log, and it is worth remembering.
Yeah, I think that's a good idea. Let's see. I'm going to choose letters this time. L can be, it is worth entering in the log. And it is worth remembering. We can make just an R. It is worth remembering. So this will be, our second statement will be of the form L implies R. Statement number 3, I have never met anything worth remembering on a voyage. Well, we already have something about being worth remembering. I think the on the voyage part is kind of irrelevant. If we wanted to, we could put it is worth remembering on a voyage as part of statement R, but that doesn't really change anything. So I think we only really need one new additional base statement in this, and that is going to be, I'm going to call it statement I, which is I have met it. So if statement I is of the form I have met it, and statement R is of the form it is worth remembering, how could we write statement number 3 here as an implication? I have never met anything worth remembering.
Could do the negation of I.
The negation of I implies R?
Yeah.
So you're saying, if I have never met it, then it is worth remembering?
Oh, wait, no. No. I mean, that's what it says, but
I think you're close.
Okay.
I do think we need I, R, and a negation somehow appearing. But right now it's that saying, if I have not met it, then it is worth remembering. There are probably many things out there in the world that I have not met that aren't really worth remembering. I would hope. Otherwise, every time I see something new for the rest of my life, I'll have to remember it, and that would be difficult.
Negation of R, negation of I.
Okay, let's try that. So this would be saying, if I have not remembered it, then...
No, I and then R. I mixed up the order by that.
I think this third one is definitely a tricky one. Like that? So let's see. So this would be, if I have never met it, then it is not worth remembering. Well, if I have never met it, then it is not worth remembering. Doesn't quite mean the same thing as I have never met anything worth remembering. I think we only want a single negative, or a single negation that shows up here.
So just I negation of R.
I implies negation of R. That would be, if I have met it, then it is not worth remembering. Final answer? What do you all think? I think this will do it. If I have met it, then it is not worth remembering. Basically implying that you have never met anything that is worth remembering. So these can definitely be tricky, and here it might be helpful, and here it's definitely helpful to maybe try writing a few things down involving I, R, negation symbols. I will say, one good rule of thumb to try and remember, you're usually not going to have something that has double negation in it. And if you do end up with something like not I implies not R, it might be just more helpful to write that as R implies I, something that doesn't have any negations in it to make it a little bit easier to understand. In other words, to use the contrapositive. All right, Nido mosquito. If it is noticed at sea, it is worth recording in the log. Already have base statements for both of those two things. So how could we write an implication that would denote if it is noticed at sea, then it is worth recording in the log?
S implies L.
If S, then L. I like it. And so now, we're in the example we're given, we have these four base statements to work with. We have that W implies S. We have L implies R. We have I implies the negation of R. And we have that S implies L. What do you all think? Are we ready to start making a chain of implications out of these? Okay. Does anybody have a proposed starting point for making our chain?
At W or mermaids.
At W or what?
Mermaids.
Oh yeah, the mermaids. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So why did you choose W out of curiosity?
Because I've already looked at this chain to figure out what order I can put them in.
Oh, congratulations. I agree, W is a good starting point. What would make W, though, in particular, a useful starting point?
It's because no other implication ends with W, so we can't really, I mean, unless, it's the only implication that we have on the board with the term W in it, and it starts with W. I don't know, that was my reasoning with it.
No, I think you're absolutely right. I think the fact that W only appears in a single one of these implications. As we kind of talked about last time, if you want to make a chain of implications out of all of these, you always want to start and end. You always want your starting point to be one of the base statements that only appears once. And that if it appears twice, then it's going to be part of one of the it's going to be one of the letters appearing in the middle of your chain.
Should we write down the contrapositives first? We're probably going to need one or two.
I highly suspect we're going to need one or two, mainly because I see a negation showing up in one of these. Because R is going to be a point in the middle, and so I assume we're going to at some point need that L implies R, and then if we want to get from R to anything else, we're going to need the contrapositive of the third one. So if we do that, we can take the contrapositives. And we should end up with not S implies not W, not R implies not L. How would we take the contrapositive of I implies not R?
R implies not I.
Exactly. R implies not I. Not R implies not I, and not R is, of course, logically equivalent to R. And finally, we'll have a not L implies not S. And so we've been given a proposed starting point that starts at W. And since we have four base statements, we're given four different implications. That's going to tell us that we should have four separate arrows as part of our chain. Because we should be able to use each of the four individual statements that we started with, or their contrapositives exactly once. So W is going to imply S, according to the first statement. If we want, we can even check off each line as we use it. I think S is going to imply L. L is going to imply R. And finally, what is R going to imply?
Not.
R is going to imply not I. And I think this last one ends up being the only case here where we need to use the contrapositive. But it's still a good exercise just to come up with contrapositives for the others, because sometimes it's hard to tell which ones you're going to end up needing the original versions of, which ones you're going to end up needing the contrapositives for. And so if we wanted to write our conclusion, the statement that has to hold true using all four statements in our hypothesis, how can we write out W implies not I using words?
If it is a mermaid, then I have not met it.
If it is a mermaid, then I have not met it. Or a simpler way of just saying it, of saying the same thing, I think, would be, I have never met a mermaid. Which is true. I can't say that I ever have met a mermaid. All mermaids are noticed at sea. Anything noticed at sea is worth recording in the log. Anything worth recording in the log must be worth remembering. And using contrapositive of third statement, anything that's worth remembering is something. Let's see. Anything that is worth remembering is something that I have never met. So combining all these together, we get if it is a mermaid, then I have not met it. And the other way we could have gone about this is we could have also started at I. If we had done that, we could have gone I implies not R, which implies not L, which implies not S, which implies not W. And we would have ended up with a logically equivalent conclusion of if I have met it, then it is not a mermaid. Versus if it is a mermaid, then I have not met it. Both logically equivalent statements, both perfectly acceptable conclusions. This one ends up using 3 of the contrapositives, though, whereas this one only used 1. Mathematically, they're equally valid. Any questions or comments about this example? In that case, I would like for you all to take just a few minutes. I want you to look at this English example at the bottom of the page. All you English major wannabes out there. All writers who understand human nature are clever. Writers who can't stir the hearts of men cannot be true poets. Shakespeare wrote Hamlet. Those who can stir the hearts of men must understand human nature. And Hamlet was written by a true poet. I'd like for you all to take a look at this and see if you can construct a conclusion that uses all 5 of the base statements. Let's go ahead and take a couple minutes and look at that, and we'll come back together as a class once you've had a chance to think about it. By the way, those of you who are watching these recordings, you should take a few minutes and try this out for yourself as well before zooming forward in the video to watch what's going on, to watch kind of our discussion of it. Because I think it makes for good practice to try some of these out for yourselves before actually going through and then just seeing what the results are. You get a lot more out of it if you try it yourselves and then go to, what am I trying to say? You get a lot more out of it if you try it yourselves first before just kind of seeing what the answer is. Also, if you're watching this video, you're awesome, and please stay safe. You all are awesome too if you're in here. Don't forget that part of the process is once you have a string of implications that kind of gets you from one thing from one base statement to another, you need to be able to translate that back into modern English. In other words, being able to say, what is the symbolic implication you came up with as your conclusion? How can we put that into words? Go ahead and take about another minute, and then we'll come back and talk about this as a class. Okay, let's come back together as a class and talk about this. So I know some really good ideas as I was walking around the room, kind of glancing at your notes. I thought you all had some good observations and some nice ways of kind of breaking these down into base statements and then rewriting each of these base statements rewriting each of the original 5 statements as some sort of implication. So how could we take our first statement, all writers who understand human nature are clever? How can we break that up into 2 base statements and rewrite as an implication? Anyone have any base statements that they would like to share from this first one?
I just said first off, it is a writer.
It is a writer. It is a writer. Are writers it's to you?
It was just the easiest thing for me. I didn't want to do it with they and them pronouns.
Yes. So that's perfectly fine. We could just have our first one be it is a writer. I'm going to say they are a writer. But if you wanted to use it here, to a mathematician, it doesn't matter. To an English, don't use that around your English professors though, or they might take offense. So we could break up our first one into they are a writer. What was your second one, out of curiosity?
So they understand human nature.
They understand human nature.
I left out the clever. I did make a statement for clever, but I left it out because it didn't seem to be relevant to the rest of the statements. Like there's never a repeat of it.
There's never a repeat of it. So, but I feel like it is an important part of the first statement, so I do think it would be good to include it somehow.
Yeah, I did write down they are clever, but I wasn't sure if you're able to write like compounds, multiple letters in an if-then statement.
Yeah, if you have, I think the goal for all of these is to be able to write these down as sort of a single implication, single like A implies B. It is possible that you could construct a Lewis Carroll puzzle where an individual statement in it is something of the form A implies B and B implies C. But Lewis Carroll didn't like writing his puzzles like that. He felt like that made it a little bit too complicated to look at. And so, I'm not sure I'm not sure I like your original choice of two statements. Nothing wrong. I think there's certainly, you could break it up into multiples, 3 statements like that. But I think there's a way that we could rewrite these first two kind of base statements that we only end up using 2 of them.
If they are a writer that understands human nature, then they are clever.
Okay, so basically you broke it up into they are a writer who understands human nature, and then they are clever, are your 2 base statements. That sound okay to the rest of everybody? I think so. So I'll tell you how I did this. The way I actually did this was, since all of these statements are kind of referring to writers, like all of these are referring to writers in different ways. They're a writer who can stir the hearts of men. They're a writer who is named Shakespeare. They're a writer of Hamlet. I made all of my base statements just statements that referred to writers. You could certainly just kind of leave off writers and just give a general they for all of the base statements, and that would also work. But I think if we look at our first statement, being able to talk about writers is important, but we could just make that part of the base statement by saying they're a writer who understands human nature. They are a writer that is clever. And then, because to me, when I look at this first statement, there's 2 really important parts to it. Talking about people who understand human nature and talking about being clever. So I think those kind of need to be the basis, so to speak, of our 2 base statements. So I chose, what letter did I use? I chose the letter U to refer to the writer understands human nature. And my C was just the writer is clever. Then our first statement is just going to be of the form U implies C. If the writer understands human nature, then the writer is clever. What about our second statement? This one I actually found to be the most difficult. Writers who can't stir the hearts of men cannot be true poets. It's a bit trickier.
I used they instead of vital, but
That's fine. We can just assume that all of these statements are just referring to writers in general.
right, so I have they can stir the hearts of men, and they are true poets.
Okay. What letter did you use for they can stir the hearts of men?
I used M.
M for men? Okay. They can stir the hearts of men. And what letter did you use they are true poets? Use the same letters I did for these. Yeah, I personally think it's helpful to me to make my letters kind of reflect something that's in the base statement, like C for the writer is clever, because clever starts with C. I like the choice of M for they can stir the hearts of men, because even though we could use H for hearts, I may have used H for a different base statement later on. And so how did you write this second base statement out symbolically then? Or not base statement, the second statement in the puzzle.
Negation of M implies negation of P.
Negation of M implies negation of P. I'm going to guess that one's going to be one we'll likely end up using the contrapositive version of instead. But I like if M is false, meaning if they cannot stir the hearts of men, then not P. Then they are not true poets. Meaning if they are true poets, then they should be able to stir the hearts of men. What about statement number 3? Shakespeare wrote Hamlet. That's a pretty simple one. Doesn't look like an implication. How could we kind of break this apart into 2 parts and then just say, and then restate statement number 3 as an implication?
So I broke it into, it is Hamlet, and it was written by Shakespeare, and I restrung it as, if it is Hamlet, then it was written by Shakespeare.
Ooh, if it is Hamlet, then it was written by Shakespeare. That would certainly be a way you could break this up into two separate implications. I'm not going to use those as my base statements, mainly because all the base statements we have so far are kind of referring to the writers of things. Like, the writer understands human nature, the writer is clever, they can stir the hearts of men, meaning the writer, and the writer is a true poet. I noticed that you kind of framed your two base statements here as, instead of being framed around the person doing the writing, you framed it around the work that's being written. Works being written by Shakespeare, the works being written by the work being Hamlet. And I think that's a perfectly great way to break this up into, or rewrite this as an implication and break it up into two base statements. I'm going to choose two base statements, though, that are a little bit closer to the ones we already have, just to make them writer-focused as opposed to work-focused. Just because then it'll be easier to sort of connect strings of implications later on. Does that make sense?
It does.
Yeah, no, that's a good observation. So the way I had it was the writer is Shakespeare, or they are Shakespeare. And then my H, which it is, they wrote Hamlet. Which means that our statement number 3, Shakespeare wrote Hamlet, can end up just being in the form of, if they are Shakespeare, then they wrote Hamlet. Fun fact, anyone know what my favorite, of course you don't, I never said it. My favorite play of all time, by the way, is not Hamlet, but it's close to Hamlet. It's Rosencrantz and Guildenstern are Dead. Mainly because when I was in college, I acted in a performance of it as one of the tragedians, and I loved it. Good times. Never acted in Hamlet itself, though. So, U implies C, not M implies not P, S implies H. Those who can stir the hearts of men must understand true nature. I think we can get by with this one without writing any new base statements. I'm going to write this one as, if they could stir the hearts of men, then they can understand human nature, meaning M is going to imply you here. And finally, Hamlet was written by a true poet. I could rewrite that one symbolically using two of the base statements that we already have.
Oh, I'm sorry, I was stretching.
Okay.
H then P.
If H, then P. If it is if they wrote Hamlet, then they are a true poet. And then if we want, we can even construct the contrapositives of all of these. I suspect the only contrapositive we might end up needing is the second one, unless we want our entire chain of implications to be made up of negations, which I would prefer not to, if possible. So what do you think? What would be a good starting point? A letter that perhaps appears as the first part of an implication, but doesn't appear anywhere else.
S.
S. Start with good old William Shakespeare. I think that's a good place to start. Because then, if S is true, we then know H has to be true. If H is true, we know P has to be true. If P is true, here we can use the contrapositive of statement number 2 and say that statement M has to be true, which implies statement U has to be true, which implies statement C has to be true. Shikma. So how could we take this entire chain of implications and just rewrite first implies last as a single statement?
Shakespeare was clever.
Ooh, you took it nice. I like how you kind of put it in a shortened form. Instead of, you could have said, if they are Shakespeare, then they are clever. But a kind of a nicer, easier way to write that same sentiment would just be to say, Shakespeare was clever. You could have also constructed a chain that started with negation of C, ended up with negation of S, and then the chain would just ultimately come down to, if they are not clever, then they are not Shakespeare. Shakespeare was not in the non-clever group. Any questions or comments? Yes?
I originally worked through it with the negation of C, and that was just kind of a pain with all like because you were basically using a contrapositive for everything.
Yeah, then you'd have to say, not C implies not U implies not M, hey, not M implies not P implies not H implies not S, and you should be able to do it, but that is a more difficult way to do it.
I eventually got pretty swamped up, and I was like, wait a minute, there's an easier way to do this.
Yeah, that's a good observation. You can there's always going to be two different ways to do this, but it will often be the case that one way is easier than the other way.
So yeah, what my question was going to be is usually is the way with fewer negations in it, is that usually going to be the easier way, the more simplistic way to work through it?
Yes. It's either that or just the way that uses the contrapositive the fewest number of times, so you don't have to worry about doing as many contrapositives.
Okay.
Either way, though, you should be able to end up at a logically valid conclusion. So I like trying to do it with fewer negations, fewer uses of the contrapositive if I can. But if you do it the hard way, more power to you. In my opinion, the hardest part of this is just getting all the base statements down from this. I feel like for me, once I have the base statements, it's not so hard to construct all the symbolic statements, but getting these down was the hardest part for me. All right, I'll talk briefly about how we're wrapping up. So this is going to actually conclude our unit on logic, which has kind of been the entire semester up to this point. Once we jump into Standard 9, we're going to stop talking about kind of these general logical things and start looking at kind of different axiomatic systems. And we'll be getting into talking about Euclid and how he revolutionized the study of math. Good day, everybody. I'll see you all on Friday. We'll start Standard 9.